All right, people, we are ready to begin. So let's get quiet. Put our phones away, please. You need to put your phone away, hon. All right, we'll take it. Okay. All right. So we are beginning chapter 2, Western Asia and Egypt. Section 1 starts with Mesopotamia. So this is where we will begin. This is a big chapter, as you have noted with the thickness of those notes. We will be looking at a lot of different civilizations besides Egypt. We'll be working with creating mind maps to make sure that you can connect all the stuff that goes with each civilization, because you will be tested and have to remember stuff about each individual civilization. So we'll work through that. So our first thing is geography. So when we look at each one of these civilizations, the first thing we're going to do is talk about where they are and where they're located. So the Greeks give the name Mesopotamia as the land between two rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates rivers. You have to know those two rivers, Tigris and Euphrates. My football players and people who like football, I always remember it as a tight end, Tigris, Euphrates. I don't know why that makes me remember it, but that's what it is. And Mesopotamia means land between two rivers. And again, this is Mesopotamia is named by the Greeks, who were not around during this time period. So if you lived in the land between two rivers, you would not have said that you were living in Mesopotamia. That's what the Greeks named it so that we could study it. Greeks are going to be our first recorders of history. When we get to ancient Greece, they will be the ones that write all this stuff down, right? Because this is still really kind of prehistory. And they will write these things down, and they will use their words to write those down. You can just put it right there, sweetie. They'll use their words to write all of these things down. This is an arc of land from the Mediterranean Sea to the Persian Gulf, known as the Fertile Crescent. So I'll try to draw it so it doesn't bother us. So those of you that maybe are like one of my friends, Sheldon Cooper, who like fun with flags. Anyone know what lots of countries located in this area have on their flag? A Fertile Crescent? There are lots of Islamic Muslim countries that use that Fertile Crescent, or what we think is a moon, I think I might have it backwards, on their flags. It has nothing to do with a moon. It has to do with this Fertile Crescent, that this is the birth of all civilization. So it is paying homage to the fact that in this place, that eventually is going to be Persia and Iran, will be the cradle of civilization, so that Fertile Crescent. Two rivers are going to overflow their banks, and that will give us the ability to grow food in this desert. This is a desert. It gets 10 inches of rain a year. It does not have enough rain or precipitation to support agriculture. It doesn't. And because of that, they relied on water flow from mountains to come down and overflow those banks. And what happens when it overflows the banks, it digs up that bottom silt, that black dirt at the bottom of the river, and deposits it on the side of the river. And that's where we will be able to grow things, just along the riverbanks, nowhere else. So when we look at those river valleys, that's the significance. So this flooding left layers of that deep, rich, dark soil just along the sides of the riverbanks, and that is what allows agriculture to grow. They can't grow it anywhere else. Once they leave the sides of that riverbank, they go back to sand and dirt, and nothing will grow there. So everything has to be right along that river, those two rivers. This ability to sustain abundant agriculture was the basis for the cradle of civilization. That last bullet point is a test question. How do we create civilization? We have more food than we need. That is the necessity to create civilization. Because if we don't, number one thing we can't get is cities. We can't have a lot of people living together if we can't feed all of those people. So does that all make sense? So think about that flooding. It drags up all that black, rich soil, deposits it on the side. So these people need flooding to occur. They need for it to happen, and it needs to happen. And what will be different from these people is that they don't know when it's going to happen, because these Ural Mountains where the snow will melt, it doesn't do it it doesn't do it on a regular basis. When we get to Egypt, the Nile will flood on a regular basis, so they will be able to track it a little better. These Mesopotamians, they don't know when it's going to occur, so it is difficult for them to control that part. So, developing agriculture. Early farmers, this is what I'm ahead of myself. Early farmers unable to predict when the floods would occur, so they don't know when it's going to happen. And again, when we think back about religion, and one of those things for religion was to explain things that we don't understand, this is definitely one of those things that we don't understand. And so the Mesopotamians are going to create thousands of gods because we don't know when this flooding is going to occur. Their agriculture is inconsistent, so again, they're a little bit, their civilizations are a little bit smaller. They need to be able to control the water supply, so they will develop irrigation and draining ditches. And again, these are just ditches that they can dig with their hands. And now that farmers can control the water supply, so now that we don't always have to depend on this flooding, and we can create these drainage ditches that will hold and store the water when it comes, now we can grow abundant food and we can control. Again, the most important thing is in this place, in the desert, is being able to control your environment, right? Deserts are difficult places to survive in, especially deserts like the desert that we're talking about. It is a desert that is hot in the day and goes and drops temperature at night. We got two kinds of deserts. Some deserts are just hot all the time. They don't ever cool off. Some deserts, which are the ones where people die most regularly, are those deserts that are 120 degrees in the daytime but drop to like 30, 40 degrees at night. And then people die at night because they don't have or have taken the correct procedures to bring warm stuff, right? You don't think about bringing warm stuff in a desert, but the temperature drops, and that's when people die at night. So these are the kinds of things that people are trying to control. The beginnings of civilization, trying to control these environments that we're in. All right, questions about that? This slide, really important. Now that farmers could control the water supply, they can grow a surplus of food. So now we don't just need to grow what we can eat, we can grow as much food as we can. This leads to population growth. The fact that we have a surplus of food, and not to get too much like a health class, but part of that is for women to be able to reproduce, they have to have a certain amount of fat on their body so that their body says, okay, you have enough fat on your body that you can sustain a child, a pregnancy. And so that surplus of food allows people to eat. And this population growth leads to the emergence of civilization in Mesopotamia. And again, that is a test question. Where did civilization begin? In Mesopotamia. Where did we find people first? That's in Africa. That's just people. But now we're talking about civilization, and civilization begins in Mesopotamia. All right. Ancient Mesopotamians, civilizations covered a large area that involved many different peoples. This might look different on your slide just because I print it bigger, but it's the same thing. So ancient Mesopotamia, civilization. So Mesopotamia is a region. Mesopotamia is the region between the two rivers, and inside those rivers, we've got three major areas or three major groups of people. Assyria, which is not the country of Syria, not the same. Assyria does not exist. Akkad, again, doesn't exist anymore. And that should be Sumner. It's not summer. It's one of those lovely autocorrects. It's Sumer.
Okay, how do you spell it?
It should just, I'm sorry, it should just be Sumer, one M. That lovely autocorrect. So those are the three groups that we'll be looking at. And we're first going to pay most attention to the city-states of Mesopotamia, Sumer. So again, here we start off with one of my very favorite sentences. We do not know how these people got there. We have no idea how the Sumerians ended up where they're at. All we know is that at 3000 BCE, they have cities. Again, somebody go find that and figure it out, because we don't know. So around 3000 BCE, the Sumerians had established several cities in Mesopotamia, one of them being the city of Ur that you read about yesterday at home. These Sumerians establish a city-state, and we're going to talk about city-states quite often at the beginning of our course, because these people are going to have them, and then our next people that will have city-states will be the ancient Greeks. So a definition, again, this is a definition. Those of you that are taking awesome notes, make sure that you know that this city-state is a definition, and I'm going to need to know this definition on my test. A city-state that has political and economic control over the surrounding countryside. So if we can try to think in our world what a city-state is counties compared to Indianapolis, right? So Indianapolis is the center, but our little city-state has Sullivan as the political and economic, and they control the countryside. So it's kind of hard. We don't have real examples of city-states in modern world because they don't exist, because they aren't in a modern time very effective government, because they're small entities, but think of it kind of like a county. All right. Important Sumerian cities were Eridu, Ur, and Uruk. And again, this is what you read yesterday. Sumerians built walls around cities and included defense towers. So this is, again, what we ended our first chapter talking about. Now that we're storing things like food, people want to get to our food. So how do we defend this? We have to be proactive in keeping people from getting into our cities. So not only do we build walls, but we also build defense towers, something big that looks down, that oftentimes has little slots in it where I can stick little arrows through and I don't have to expose myself. Houses, walls, temples built from mud bricks, and these again are adobe bricks. So I think it's difficult when you're from a place that doesn't have that hard, because my husband again grew up around in Southern California, and he would often talk about hitting and beaming kids in the head with dirt clods, and he calls them dirt clods, and I'm like, wow, okay, that's bad. But a dirt clod, for us, a dirt clod, you throw a dirt clod, it hits it, and it sprays. But if you think about a dirt clod as an adobe brick, which is really what it was, because when I moved to Southern California, I realized this is not a dirt clod. This is a brick you're throwing at people's head. It's not, it doesn't bust. This is dense mud brick. So there are, and when we get to a ziggurat, you'll see that in 2000, now this was the 20th century, in the 20th century, these ziggurats are still standing. So please don't think about mud bricks like what we could build. These are hardcore bricks. What bricks tell us about a civilization, and especially uniform bricks, is that they had control over the making of these bricks, and that these bricks were uniform, that they understood that building with bricks required some precision, invented arches, domes, and built the largest brick building in the world. And again, building with bricks are really difficult. They are heavy. We have a retaining wall in our backyard, and I'm sure it was built in the 70s, but it is now, instead of straight up, just because it's heavy and it leans, it's now like at a 45-degree angle, this retaining wall. So building with bricks is not the easiest thing to do, especially when you're on a foundation made out of sand. All right, Sumerian religion. The most important building in every city was the temple, the ziggurat. And this is a weird word. You need to know that it's a temple, and it is a matching definition. And this, again, is why I don't do vocab words, because you will never, ever, ever, I don't think, ever, unless you're on Jeopardy, use the word ziggurat ever again. But for our test, you need to know that that's a temple. It is the temple. They believed that gods and goddesses owned and ruled the cities. So those cities were not owned by people, land not owned by people, owned by gods and goddesses, because we are going to have goddesses. The temple will be in the center of the city. These priests and priestesses, and again, female priestesses, which again will happen for a short period of time, that women will be able to have access to that knowledge, supervise the temple, and then commanded enormous power. Enormous power. Another vocab word at the bottom is a theocracy. And again, you need to know that that word means ruled by a divine authority, ruled by a god, ruled by a religion, ruled by a leader of faith. That's a theocracy. And that word breaks down again. That's a Greek word, theo meaning God, the last part meaning rule. So here is a modern day ziggurat. So I got this picture because there's an airplane flying so that you know that it's around. That is how big those ziggurats are. That is how much work went into building that. You could see that it is huge and would require a lot of resources. A lot of resources in making those bricks, a lot of resources in putting those together for a building that really doesn't do anything except honor the gods and goddesses. And that, again, is what I'm trying to pound into your head, how important this was for the village and how important it was for the village or the civilization to honor those gods and goddesses. The only people that would be, let me see if I can find my, the only people that would be allowed up these steps would be the priests and priestesses. So this is not what we would think of as like a house of worship or where people gathered. And then in and around in these areas would be where the people of the civilization or the village would leave their sacrifices, and then the priests and priestesses would walk up, do their little thing up there, and then come back down. And we're going to stop. We're going to do one more slide just to finish up on religion and kings. Kings ruled by divine right. So this is an important theory, and this theory about king ruling by divine right is going to last into modern time period until we get to the 18th century. And if I'm a king and I'm ruling by divine right, which means that whatever God we believe in anointed me as king, if you go against me as your king, you're also going against what else? You're also going against God. It gives me a tremendous power because God picked me to be your king. If you go against me, you're not just going against me, you're going against our God. So that is a lot of power. Kings receive their power from gods, and they have enormous power. Now, at this point, kings are kings because they're powerful. We don't have hereditary kings. I'm not going to be a king because my dad is a king. I am a king or a leader because I'm powerful, and I most often took over whatever this civilization is. So these kings are going to lead armies, supervise the building of public works, organize farmers for irrigation. And if we go back, and I'll come back if you need this, if we go back to this building, you can see why there was a necessity of organizing these public works, because that would have been one of the things that would have been built, this big, giant temple. Okay? Questions about any of that? Yes, ma'am. There we go. So that is all I have for us today. Make sure now that you go back and answer that bell question from Thursday, what Mesopotamia means. Today, do I ask you about Labor Day? Okay, I ask you about, is that what today is? What does Labor Day mean? So again, we're not here on Monday. Yes, sir.
I'm ready for the last slide.
Gwen, are you done with this one? You need me to go back to the last one? This one?
Yeah.
Okay. And my people that were not here yesterday, we did do an assignment on paper. And please, those of you that did not turn that in yesterday, please make sure you've got that turned in today. There we go.